Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel for another round of 3-star rift clears. Today we are progressing into the next set of rifts, and that is going to be none other than the Sigma rifts. Now, as in the previous videos, we will be targeting 5 rifts, and those 5 will be the ones that are outlined on the screen right now. So don't forget to subscribe and leave a like on the video if you enjoy, and without further ado, let's jump into these rifts. Now, the first rift that we'll be having a look at today is the level 31 wave rift, where we need to defeat 200 enemies in Avengers Tower. Now, this is a pretty straightforward rift, and the parameters are also pretty simple to get through. Of course, you need to clear out the trial to get the 1-star clear. If you can do so with 1 or fewer teammate incapacitations, you can get your 2nd star, and the 3rd star can be obtained by clearing the rift in 2 minutes and 50 seconds or less. And again, I employ a similar strategy to what you've seen in previous episodes of this series, where we want to try getting as much ground covered as possible, and Gambit and Miles Morales do a very good job at getting large areas of the stage covered and allowing us to really knock down those 200 enemies in a quite efficient manner. So as you'll see here, we have the standard setup. Now, the enemies that we'll be facing off against are Hydra enemies, mostly, but we do have some AIM enemies that come in towards the end as well. And as you can see, Gambit, with his dangerous ground setup here, really covers a good third to half of the stage, where we're always hitting at least a small group of these grunts. So he is very efficient in making sure that we lay down consistent, reliable damage. Also, Miles Morales does very well at covering the remainder of that ground with his electro webs, and they just lay down a very good amount of firepower on these enemies. Now, Wolverine and Thanos, they have a lot of high damage output to knock through the remainder of these characters, and I do switch over to them occasionally when I need to allow the EP to pick up a little bit more, or when I've got to conserve EP from my main characters, being Gambit and Miles Morales, due to them being quite efficient. Now, Wolverine does a very good job at burning through these larger characters that have the stagger bars, or the mighty enemies, especially because these fire enemies can cause you to stagger a little bit in your warpath if they hit you with their fire projectiles. So all in all, it's a pretty easy rift to go through. So we do focus down the larger enemies with Wolverine here, and at this point we've got past the halfway point in this fight, and as we get around the 150 enemy mark, we'll go ahead and let loose all of our extreme attacks, as those will be exactly what we need to do in order to assure that we can take down the remainder of the enemies on this stage within that time frame. Now, we're just about there. Gambit at this point is looking a little bit peakish, so I go ahead and detonate his extreme attack first, as I do have a mastery setup where the damage dealt by the extreme attacks will allow me to recoup health. Now, I didn't get quite as many opponents down with that as I was hoping, but it's still more than what we needed to get back on track for getting that clear in the 2 minutes and 50 seconds or less. Now, Gambit at this point is doing a lot better health-wise, where we were able to fully recover his health, so I'm looking to just burn down as many of these mighty enemies with the deadly deal as I can, and that gets us the clear in the 2 minutes and 50 second time frame. The second rift that we'll be covering today is the level 33 countdown on the Kree Ship. Now, these are quite a bit of fun because it allows you to really push your abilities to the max. Now, on the countdown style rifts, you start with the 45 seconds on the clock, but you gain time back as you defeat enemies that you encounter. To get a 1-star clear on this rift, you need to, of course, get through the rift in the trial. To get the 2nd star, we need to have 1 minute and 20 seconds or more on the clock at the end of the trial. And the 3rd and final rift is making sure that no team members become incapacitated as you are fighting, which can be a little challenging in these types of events because there's a lot of really big enemies, and especially on the Kree ship, there's the whole segment where the bombs come through and detonate, which can be a little problematic, but if you strategize correctly, you really shouldn't have to worry about that too much. Now, the change up in the enemies that we'll be fighting in this version is, instead of the Kree enemies, we will actually be facing off against a lot of the Inhuman worker grunts, which is an interesting design choice, but it keeps things fresh and interesting at the very least. Now, you do have these grunts that will come up and kind of kamikaze on you, which isn't exactly a fun time, but they don't deal a whole lot of damage, and you can roll around them if you anticipate them correctly. So, right off the bat, we are getting a very sheer number of these opponents knocked down, and we've already got 2 minutes and 20 seconds on our timer as we have the countdown remaining. Now, these little areas that pause do pause the countdown on your timer as well. So my main priority with Gambit is I want to make sure we can get this shield reactor down as fast as possible, because that opens up the second section of the fight and opens up the final section against Ronan, which is what's needed for that full clear. So with Gambit, I go ahead and I let loose with all of the EP using the Deadly Deal, and then I switch over to Wolverine for the remainder of the damage against the core computer here, as that Adamantium Uppercut really puts in a good amount of work. Now that we have that barrier down, we can go ahead and finish off these opponents that are remaining, and we do have some of the actual Kree opponents popping up at this point, which, you know, it's kind of to be expected because this is their ship. So we go ahead and take out the remainder of these mighty enemies, and we've still got 2 minutes and 30 seconds on the clock before we even get into the Ronan fight, and we've got a couple more opponents that we can take out here before actually getting into that fight. Now, one thing that's really nice about where I'm currently at is I have my extreme attacks online for all 4 of my characters, which means that I can let loose on those as soon as we have Ronan into his final stage to blitz down the remainder of that fight and make sure that we can meet the parameters. It's also beneficial because you can recover health using those extreme abilities if you have the right skill tree set up as well. Now, I've been playing a similar tactic with Gambit as we've seen in basically every fight that I bring him into, where we want to have this deadly ground set up and running as frequently and as long as we possibly can, as it is very efficient at burning down the enemies. Now, I do go ahead and detonate my extreme attacks a little bit earlier than I originally had intended to, but it gets us into the second stage of the fight, and at this point, I'm not too concerned about my characters fainting, and I'm also not too overly occupied about the timer running down to the point where we're sacrificing that final start either. Now, Miles, I do want to make sure I get the electrowebs set up. I'm also using the Venom Strike to burn through a lot of Ronan's health, as he can really put in a nice amount of work there, especially when you synergize him with other team members that you have in the vicinity. We do end up finishing that fight with about 3 minutes on the timer, and that gives us the 3-star clear. The third rift that we will be having a look at today is easily the most stressful and confusing rift that I have tried to accomplish. Probably not in this entire series, but it's quite frustrating because it's a level 33 ability trial against Juggernaut. Now, the fight in and of itself is pretty short. As you can see, one of the goal objectives is to finish the fight in 1 minute and 10 seconds or less, which is doable because all it is that Juggernaut fight from the bottom part of the Xavier Mansion, the Ricochet Chamber, after he tears through the remainder of the mansion. The trickier part to this fight is that you have to do it with no damage taken, and that is quite a challenge. Now, when I first saw this, I was like, there's no way you can get through this without taking any damage because your CPO counterparts are stupid and they run headlong into danger. Admittedly, they take less damage when doing so, but there was really no way that I thought you could feasibly do this challenge. As it turns out, in order to get this clear and get that final star, the character that you control cannot have taken any damage during the course of the fight. So pick your favorite character, get really good at dodging and glancing around attacks, and burn Juggernaut down as quickly as you can in order to avoid that. I didn't test this, but I would highly advise against switching onto another character in your party for any reason, because that could very easily invalidate the no damage taken parameter. So I did switch up my tactics a little bit as I was in my quest to get this clear. You'll see that I have Captain America and Black Panther on the team, mainly because they have abilities that allow us to fully avoid or reflect damage back at the opponent that we're going after. But as it turns out, I've got Wolverine here. I go ahead and get his Berserker Rage active and focus mainly on using my Adamantium Assault to burn down not only the stagger, but also the health bar from Juggernaut. And just like that, we have him fully taken down, and we didn't take a single ounce of damage on Wolverine, which does net us that final star and grants us all 3 for this challenge. The 4th rift we'll be having a look at today is a level 34 boss wave rift. This one focuses on Nebula, Ronan, and Kingpin. Now, nothing really extra or special in terms of this fight. You've just got to make sure that you get through the fight with 3 or fewer teammate incapacitations, which is pretty easily accomplished as long as you don't run headfirst into the big punches that are being thrown by the main boss characters, as well as finishing in 2 minutes and 50 seconds or less. So right off the bat, we just really have Nebula, and we do have other opponents that crop into this fight, but it's a relatively small arena. So after getting most of Nebula's attack or stagger bar down, I do resort over to the deadly deal for Gambit, and just like that, we have her burned down within the first 30 seconds of that fight, which is certainly quite useful. Ronan then comes into play, and he's a little bit more aggressive with his attacks that he doles out, as well as just kind of his general demeanor. He can be a little bit more of a nuisance. But I do focus mainly with Wolverine using that Adamantium uppercut to go ahead and burn through the stagger bar. It does a lot of damage, and it's really efficient if you focus on using that falling aerial attack on your way back down, because it not only increases your damage output, but it also allows you to recoup some of your MP gauge, which allows you to rinse and repeat that attack cycle more than you otherwise would be able to. Now, Ronan's big thunder attack there takes up practically the entire dome. I would say it easily 75 to 80% of the arena is just filled with the scope of that attack. Now, I detonate my extreme abilities a little bit quick here, mainly because I wanted to get through Ronan, and Kingpin is a little bit easier to manage because he prioritizes a lot of attacks that are close in proximity to him, as well as a couple of projectile attacks from his staff, but he's all around a lot less annoying than Ronan tends to be. So at this point, I've got the Cosmic Might Punch from Thanos that is putting in a lot of really nice work against not only Kingpin's stagger, but also his regular health bar. And there with another Cosmic Might Punch, we have his stagger fully depleted, but it's going to take us a little bit more to assure that we can get through this section of the fight. The next time we get his stagger bar down, we should easily be able to deplete what is remaining of his health bar. And Miles is running a little bit low on his MP, but we do manage to go ahead and get the remainder of his health down. And with that final Venom Strike, we do have the entirety of Kingpin's health burned down, and that gives us the clear with all parameters met for this mission. The 5th and final rift that we'll be having a look at today is the level 5 Ultimate Ultron fight. And this is pretty straightforward. It's basically exactly what you would think it is. It's fighting Ultron, and it's fairly similar to his main fight from the main story quest, but there are a couple of extra enemies that show up, included, but not limited to, the electrically charged sentinels, which can be a bit of a nuisance. The parameters for this fight are pretty simple. You want to get through it with one or fewer teammate incapacitations, as well as clear it out in 3 minutes and 30 seconds or less. And right off the bat, you can see we've got those sentinels that have popped up. So we go ahead and start off with using a couple of these venom strikes from Miles to burn down the stagger bars of these sentinels. Because honestly, the sooner we can get rid of them, the better, as they are quite pesky and can stagger out you and your teammates as you look to attack them. Now, the core detonation there that we had not only takes out the Sentinel, but it also takes out the remainder of Ultron's first wave of health, which is quite nice. We had to wait for his animation to fully finish out there, but we are now into his second phase, where we have Venom showing up to fight us as well, but not just any version of Venom, it's the electro-infused Venom. So we still have a lot of that stagger aspect of the attacks that we're receiving, which is never really fun to deal with. So at this point, we've got Ultron down a bit more, and as we roll around these attacks here, we want to make sure that we are keeping as much distance from Venom as we can, as he is being quite pesky at burning down the remainder of, or biting into the members of my team here. So at this point, I go ahead and resort to using some of the Deadly Deal to get Ultron into his third phase. And at this point, I do get my controls inverted a little bit, but Ultron is quite vulnerable during that section of the fight, so I think it was a noteworthy trade, especially with the amount of damage output that Wolverine tends to have. Now, we wanted to go ahead and get Ultron down as he's the main boss, but as you can notice off to the right-hand side, we need to clear out all bosses in order to finish this trial. We've just about got Ultron finished off, and with a few more uses of our Adamantium Uppercut, we should easily have that. And we do go ahead and use our extreme abilities to detonate through the remainder of these fights. That gets us through not only Ultron, but it also gets us through Venom, and the Electro Venom at that. But we've got one final boss that's shown up to play, and it's Electro himself. So that's not exactly what I was hoping for, as that's been a lot of electrical base attacks, and that stagger ability just isn't really fun to have to deal with to any extent of the word. Now we've got this final Sentinel taken down. We want to go ahead and dance around the attacks from Electro, and that core detonation is going to be more than enough to take out the remainder of his health and net us the 3-star clear for this challenge. So that's going to do it for today's rifts. We got all 5 of those rifts cleared out with the 3-star parameters for each and every one of them. So if you're enjoying this series, please feel free to let me know what you think in the comments down below. Don't forget to slap a like on the video and subscribe if you haven't already. We recently hit 65 subscribers, and I'm very pleased with that progress, as we should be on track to hitting that 100 subscriber milestone by the time my channel hits its first anniversary, which I am just ever so grateful for, and I'm looking forward to continuing to provide that content to you in the future. Until then, thanks again for watching, and you have yourself a fantastic rest of your day.